With Warzone 2 servers now live for a couple of weeks, it's clear the newer consoles, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, all easily run the game at 60 frames per second. It's a robust experience, honestly, tightly optimized to their Zen 2 cores, their RDNA 2 technology, and playing to the strengths of rapid SSD access speeds. For streaming in the terrain of Al Mazrah, Warzone 2's new setting, it just flies through. In fact, even 120Hz is feasible outside of the Series S version. But still, a question hangs over the state of last-gen consoles. For a majority of console users after all, the PS4 and Xbox One are still the go-to option, a huge install base that has to be catered to. So today, I really wanted to know just how do these older machines hold up if we include Xbox One X and PS4 Pro as well in a four-way split. Are any of these consoles actually competitive with PC or newer hardware in frame rate or in settings? And how deep do the cutbacks go for the base Xbox One version especially? Let's find out. Let's kick off with the base PS4 here. Technically speaking, the PS4 is very nicely optimized for both the campaign and team deathmatch modes of the core Modern Warfare 2 game. All signs point to it being the target system here for locking on to 1080p and 60 FPS, and sure, the payoff is imperfect. There are still drops under 60 FPS in the campaign, but really, it's respectable given its 2013 hardware. Now, if we switch over to Warzone 2, well, the priorities change here quite drastically. Yes, the initial airplane drop sequence absolutely hits 60 FPS, and equally, the 2v2 gulag sections run without a hitch. But once you've deployed your parachute, once all of Al Mazrah's assets, the textures, grass, geometry, all of it, stream in at pace on this 9-year-old machine, well, there's no holding down a locked 60 FPS. Texture pop-in is hard to ignore right at the start, I will say, but most glaring is the fact we're staring at a range of 40 to 60 FPS, wavering up and down the graph, and at times dipping into the 30s as well. Your landing spot in Al Mazrah affects how deep these frame rate dips go, but in general, PS4 rarely even glances that top 60 mark. Another interesting change from the core Modern Warfare 2 experience is PS4's native resolution, which for Warzone 2 hits lower extremes. Temporal upsampling is used, as before, alongside dynamic scaling up to 1080p, but the absolute lower bounds now appears to go to 960 by 540, halving the resolution on both axes, where in the campaign it was just horizontally. In truth, the result is far from clean. It lacks definition to the far distance in picking out oncoming players. It's a disadvantage, obviously, next to what a PS5 or Series X player sees, no doubt. The TAA, the reconstruction, all do better than you'd expect given the sheer range of pixel counts, from 540p up to 1080p and figures in between, but only so much is possible to salvage detail from a low resolution base image, and it does have an impact on visibility. Jumping to the base Xbox One next, yes, inevitably, both frame rates and resolutions take a turn for the worse. Exact measurements are tricky to lock down, but Xbox One, the S version in our case, renders to a 900p target. Worse still, the absolute lower bounds of the DRS takes us to around 800 by 450, a quarter of the target resolution before being reconstructed. No surprise, it leaves us with this very muddy, very undefined image, especially scoping across the horizon. In fact, if we switch to a comparison with base PS4 for a moment, one of the first casualties really is in image clarity. Shadows, textures, foliage density, all of these settings are identical to PS4. There are no specific lower than low Xbox One presets, in other words, it's just that the resolution takes a noticeable hit. Shimmer on grass, noise on fine texture work are much more abundant. And in general, it dulls the impact of Al Mazrah at a distance where there's just not enough pixel detail to do it justice. There's a second problem with Xbox One as well. Well, before we get to that, there's the texture popping, obviously, just like on PS4. Okay, these are mostly right at the start of a Warzone matchup after landing the jump. It's temporary, but still pretty glaring. Equally frustrating for Xbox One is, in my experience, audio cutting out. Certain channels of the mix, the music, the ambient effects, cut out completely for a few seconds until the world has loaded in more. All of this pales in comparison though to the point I was getting to, which is the state of the frame rate. Here, we're often, on average, a full 10 frames per second lower than base PS4, and sometimes more. The overall range jumps down a level to between 30 and 50 FPS, plus Xbox One introduces screen tearing right at the top of the display, something we see on the One X version 2, and even 2v2 gulag sections barely clear the gap to 60. So for any base Xbox One player downloading Warzone 2 on a whim, as a free-to-play game of course, it's hard to believe they'd be really impressed by the results here. I've got to say, this low frame rate has a real, tangible impact on input latency too, while turning, while picking up weapons. It's to such a point that you're at a severe disadvantage playing against any other console user in reaction speeds, like Xbox Series X here. On that note, here's how base Xbox One compares to Microsoft's best machine, using the spectator mode to match gameplay. The clarity in motion, shadow resolution, the grass density, even texture quality. It's a remarkable downgrade. Warzone 2 runs on Xbox One in the loosest sense of the word. It does obviously run, it's just that its Jaguar CPU cores are working hard to stream the world in, even with the drop in settings like foliage here. The resolution is pared down to a dynamic 900p, and the frame rate is far from the trademark 60 FPS Call of Duty is known for. It runs though, it's just that it's almost at the stage where a 30 FPS cap would make more sense. The two premium last-gen consoles, the One X and PS4 Pro, fare much better as you'd expect. PS4 Pro in particular holds up remarkably well in fact, with the best frame rate of the last-gen machines. We saw it in the campaign mode, and it's true of Warzone 2 as well. PS4 Pro runs between 50 and 60 FPS, sometimes lower, which all told gives us a smoother experience while running on foot than I'd expected. Also remarkable is that PS4 Pro does it at a dynamic 1512p, which in my experience tends to drop on the horizontal axis to 1536 by 1512, though lower may be possible. We're not committed to a locked 60 FPS by any stretch, it's not watertight. But for perspective, let's jump to a four-way split against the competition. Again, we're using the spectator mode to see all four last-gen consoles render the same scene, and it paints a pretty complete picture. A note that the tearing indicator in our graph is disabled for sheer legibility, but both Xbox One consoles are tearing right at the top of the display. Base Xbox One falls far behind the pack, as you'd expect, while base PS4 is the next best option. Curiously, PS4's frame rate position is at times actually interchangeable with the Xbox One X release. It's bizarre and pretty rare. Still, you'll notice foliage-dense areas actually put One X behind PS4's reading, the main culprit likely being, well, the fact One X has an ambitious resolution target. Just like in Modern Warfare 2, One X aims for a full 4K image, though in Warzone 2's case, it dynamically adjusts down to 1920 by 1080. The knock-on effect, there are moments where One X dips lower than you'd expect, always lower than the PS4 Pro, which has a more conservative resolution goal, but then even base PS4 at rare moments, which is again pretty surprising. The four-way comparison shows just how much of Al Mazrah's detail is fundamental to all consoles. The geometric layout is exactly the same, in other words, shadow detail is also surprisingly similar outdoors, grass draw distance is pared back on base Xbox One and PS4, but not radically so next to Pro and One X. We're talking a difference of about a meter of grass as we pan around this spot. The biggest dividing point then, honestly, is the resolution. Between the four consoles, it puts One X far ahead in image clarity. There's no question, long-scoped views across the world are better defined for the far right image, except it's also fair to say the PS4 Pro version is better balanced, better optimized for hitting 60 FPS, which might be the bigger advantage. In facing up to the competition running on much more adept hardware, like Series X or PS5, which hits 60 FPS or 120 FPS, it stands half a chance. And again, of the four, it's then the base Xbox One that stands out most obviously as the one that's best avoided. Turning back to just the base PS4 version in isolation for a second, there's one aside here I want to address: the FOV setting, the field of view. Because Modern Warfare 2's default 80 setting is, let's face it, quite narrow. It trims so much peripheral vision, especially for a game as expansive as Warzone, where danger emerges from every angle. And so, the question, does bumping the FOV slider up for competitive reasons have any sort of negative impact on the frame rate? Well, here's test number 1. Overlooking the map to the northwest, PS4 at its default 80 FOV setting runs at around 56 to 57 FPS. Now, if we bump the FOV setting all the way up to 120 and then jump back to the game, it's actually about the same, possibly 1 frame lower on average, hardly a deal breaker. But then, test number 2 does show a difference. If we stick with that 120 FOV setting and try looking towards the gas as it rolls in from the south, we're getting between 47 and 54 FPS. And then, if we return to the default 80 FOV, we gain back performance, pulling us up to 56 FPS again. So the answer is, it really depends on the situation, though at points putting more elements within the player's field of view will hit the frame rate harder, especially on systems like PS4, which are already struggling. A high FOV setting is harder to afford on last-gen GPUs while holding a lock 60 then. It's a luxury, perhaps reserved for more powerful consoles like Series X. But that's not all, of course. In a 4-way comparison, showing all 4 Xbox consoles able to play Warzone 2, the full power spectrum is also laid out clearly. From the worst console of the group to one of the most powerful, Xbox One, One X, Series S, and then Series X, it's easy to see how the next-gen consoles reap the benefits of newer, faster architecture. They sustain a locked 60 FPS for one. Grass density and draw are also both higher on the series machines compared to their older Xbox One equivalents. Of course, the overall world detail is a match otherwise for competitive reasons, but certainly grass detail scales accordingly across the 4 machines. Interestingly though, image quality on Series S isn't as sharp as the older One X. Series S runs at a lower dynamic 1440p figure up against One X's dynamic 4K, which leaves us with a lower pixel count on average for the newer machine. Without a doubt, it's the smarter use of Series S's power though if we're seeing a smoother 60 FPS return, and that overall makes it a better trade-off, even if distant detail isn't quite as sharp. The scalability of the IW engine is, as ever, hugely impressive. The fact we're seeing such a range of differently spec'd machines output the same world is remarkable really. But there's a sense its true potential is being anchored to the past. Especially so looking at the old Xbox One attempting to tag along. The bottom line, Warzone 2 doesn't hide Infinity Ward's intentions for the future. It's writ large in the sub 40 FPS drops on Xbox One, and even the texture pop-in, where even base PS4 has issues. It's a project that's clearly veering away from a last generation focus, not fully, but close to it, in favour of building the best, most optimal experience for PS5 and Series X. It also speaks to the future of the Call of Duty series, which, incidentally, skips a year entirely in 2023. Warzone 2 will tide the series fans over in the interim until 2024 as a major cross-platform, cross-generation effort. In 2 years' time though, the situation may well have changed, and looking at the state of consoles like Xbox One, I'm really hoping that it does. That about wraps up the Warzone 2 coverage for this year though. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and of course don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.